Unreal Engine has recently added 3D modeling tools. This means we no longer need to use programs like Blender to create 3D objects. Instead, we can create 3D objects directly within Unreal Engine itself, and that's just insanely cool. So in this tutorial, we will go over the fundamentals of 3D modeling and create this delicious looking donut you see right here completely from scratch within UE4. So obviously this tutorial is inspired by Andrew Price's amazing Blender tutorial series. So if for some reason you haven't checked out his channel yet, then I highly recommend you do. He's pretty much the king of Blender tutorials. So before we begin, let's get one big question you probably have out of the way, and that is, will Unreal's 3D modeling tools replace Blender? And the answer is no, it absolutely will not replace Blender, because Blender is specifically designed for largely 3D modeling. So we can always expect Blender to be better than that than Unreal Engine. Also, I'm assuming some basic knowledge of Unreal. This isn't a beginner tutorial series, but I do have 2 beginner series that you can watch. And one of them is specifically designed for Blender users. So go ahead and check that out if you're new to Unreal. And with all that being said, let's create a donut. So here I have opened a blank project because we're going to be starting from scratch. So what I will do is, you'll notice that if I go to modes, we don't have any modeling tools right here. So we have to activate it first. To do so, I'm going to settings, plugins, built-in, and let's type in modeling and activate it down here. So it's going to give me a warning saying that this is in beta. So keep in mind that this is in very, very early access. So things might be different in the future. Once this is released officially, I will make an entire long tutorial series going over all the features of modeling. So this tutorial is more like a brief overview. So I'm going to hit yes and restart. Okay, once the engine restarts, we'll notice under modes, we have a new mode called modeling, and the shortcut is Shift and 6. So now we'll see that we're in modeling mode and it has a bunch of new tabs. We'll go over each one as they are needed, but for now let's go to create, and if we click on primitive, we're able to spawn in a new static mesh, and we also have a bunch of options on the left here. So let's say if I want to make this box a square that's 2 meters by 2 meters, I can make the width and the height 200 units. And if you don't know, Unreal is in centimeters. So now I have a 2 meter by 2 meter box. And if I just left click down right there and go to complete, we'll see that I have a generated folder. And within the generated folder is our box. So all the edits we make here in our level will be saved to this static mesh. So modeling tools are not level dependent. Now I'm going to delete that, and let's create a torus that will be the base of our donut. So I'm going to go to primitives. Let's switch this to torus. And down here, let's change the width to 270 just to make this a little bit thicker. And the radius to 80. And for the slices, let's bring that up to 35. And right now, this is not really a torus. This is just more like a square. So we can make this a torus by increasing the subdivisions. So let's make this 32. Also, I think I'm going to increase the slices to, let's do 46. Yeah, like that. So now we have a nice formation that will be our donut. And to spawn it in, all I have to do is left click and complete. So now we see we have a torus in our world, and we also have a torus static mesh, which will be where all our edits are saved. So let's separate this mesh out now. That's how we can get some icing on this. But first, I'm going to go down here, click on this torus, and press Ctrl and W to duplicate that. That's how we have a base for later. And now within the torus that's already in my level, if I go to triangles, I can go to select. And now I have the ability to just select whatever triangles I want. So I think I'll select a ring around the top here. So basically, you just want to go through here and make sure you get everything as you go around. So this can be annoying. It's not like in Blender where you can quickly select edge loops, but hopefully they will add that as a feature in the future. Now that I have the top selected here, I can click on grow right here within the properties, and I can increase my selection. So let's make this go a little bit down, maybe one more down, or two. Yeah, right there. So this will basically be the icing. And now that I have everything selected, I can click on separate triangles. So what this did, and accept. So what this did is that it created two meshes. So one mesh that is the top here, and another mesh that is the bottom. So I don't want this bottom where it's just kind of empty at the top here. I want this to be the entire full torus. So I will replace this with the torus we duplicated by dragging it into the static mesh slot right here. So there we go. So now we have a top that will be the icing and a bottom that will be the bread of the donut. Also, real quickly, I think I forgot to mention that within select or within pretty much any mode, you can change the size of your brush by using the bracket keys, just like in Photoshop or just like in any of the other modes within Unreal Engine. So this is how you change the size, or you could change the size right here. Now that we have our icing, if I actually increase our icing right here, we'll see that if we look below it, we pretty much just see straight through the mesh, and we don't want that. We want to be able to fill this hole right now between that edge loop, the inner edge loop, and the outer edge loop. But in order to do that, we need to use polygroups. So basically, polygroups function just like how they do in ZBrush. So if you ever use ZBrush or even Blender, they recently added their own version of polygroups called facets. They're really helpful, especially when we're sculpting or modeling. So we want to create one polygroup for this entire thing. And to do that, we want to click on polygroups. And right now our mesh is pretty divided on each face. So if I go to here and change it from UV islands, now we can see we're one polygroup, and I can press accept. Now with one polygroup being on my entire mesh, I can go into poly edit and hold down control and select the middle edge loop and the outer edge loop. Actually hold down shift and select both of those, and go down and click on fill hole. So now we get a hole right there, but we'll notice if we go up, or if I press accept, we'll see that the hole even filled the middle there, and we need to cut a hole right here to get rid of that fill. And there are two ways we can do that. We could go into create and create a new cylinder, then use the Boolean to cut a hole through there, or we could go into deform and use the polycut tool. And that's a lot faster, so I'm going to click on polycut tool and use that. And we can see we are already getting a hole that's being cut within the middle of our mesh right here, but it's a little bit too small and the polygons are too low. So let's bring up the subdivision to 32, and let's increase the scale. That's how it's just barely touching the inner edge loop, just like that. So that looks good. And then we will press accept. And now we have a nice looking ice mesh, and the bottom is filled. Also, don't forget to save everything by clicking save all. So let's save our map somewhere, and I just called it map for now, and it's located in content. Now that I have the base of the frosting done, let's real quickly create a simple material. So I'm gonna right click, new material, let's call this M_frosting. And within here, I'm going to hold down 1 and left click to give myself a constant value. And then I'm going to hold down 3 and left click to give myself a color. So here, let's make the color, yeah, like whitish, pinkish. And for the roughness, let's plug that up and let's make this 0.3. So pretty shiny, but not too shiny. Hit apply, and let's go back here and apply it. Now we're going to do some fun stuff, and that is actually going through and sculpting the frosting. So kind of like sculpting it to make it look like it's melting over on top of the bread area. So I'm going to just bring this down right here. So that's resting on top of it a bit. And now I'm going to go in here and let's go to modes, modeling. And if you go to deform, we get the options to sculpt. So if we go into sculpt, we'll see that we get a matte cap going on. this is looking kind of weird, but it can help with sculpting. If you don't want this matte cap on here, we can go here and we could change this to existing material. That's what we get back what we had before. And now by default, it's on the move brush, which is literally just a move brush. So we could just grab polygons and move them around. The sculpt brush, which is pretty much how the sculpt brush works within the landscaping mode. And we have a bunch of other brushes. Pretty much we're only going to be using sculpt and smooth. But before we can go through and start sculpting this area, we first have to increase the amount of geometry because this is way too low to sculpt. So we're going to do that using remesh. So I'm going to click on remesh and let's bring this up to 8,000. Actually, let's bring it to 9,000. And then accept. Actually, I just undo that because I forgot to do something. So if we go back into remesh, bring that up to 8,000, and it looks like it's capped at 8,000. It doesn't go beyond 8,000 as of now. Probably later we'll get the ability to make even higher meshes, but we need to make sure discard attributes is selected to true because that's how it gets rid of those red lines, and where those red lines were are basically where it's going to be really sharp. And we don't want that. We want to even out all the normals so we don't get any sharp angles. So you have to make sure discard attributes is set to true. And then accept. Now it's finding time to sculpt our frosting. And instead of using the default sculpt, I'm going to use dynamic sculpt. And what this will do is just dynamically create geometry on the fly. So this is really cool. So basically you want to make sure your size is set to something you like. And I set my fall off all the way up to 1. That's how my scoops or my brushes won't be as sharp. And then I have my brush size to move, and all the way down to relative try size, I have this set to -5. That's how we have the most polygons being created. And if I go down here, if I click on show wireframe, we'll be able to see what's happening. So now if I just take my brush and move down like that, we can see it's creating more geometry. So that just gives us even more triangles to work with. So essentially what I'm just going to do now is go through, increase my brush, decrease my brush, and just paint down randomly, sometimes bringing it up or bringing it down. Also randomly, this is a glitch. It switches in between different brushes. If you notice right there, it just went from move to smooth. Those are glitches because, again, this is in very, very early access. So I'm just going to go through and just make this look kind of realistic. So pretty much in an actual work environment, or if I was actually planning on making a good donut asset, I would not make this on an Unreal Engine. Instead, I would probably sculpt it in ZBrush and retopologize it in Blender, which is essentially just decreasing the amount of polygons and making it look nice. And then I would bake the details of my ZBrush sculpt into my low poly mesh within Substance Designer. So I imagine that workflow won't really change anytime soon, but it's just good to know that we have the ability to create pretty nice looking meshes within the Unreal Engine editor. Okay, now what I'm going to do is go on with a smooth brush and just smooth out all the other areas. That's how we get a consistent amount of geo around my entire frosting. So smooth out everything. And now we're going to apply another smoothing. So I'm going to press accept and use the smooth tool right here, which would just help get rid of those really jagged, sharp edges we're seeing by increasing smoothing iterations to maybe 4 and smoothing speed up. You can see it working in real time right there. Kind of like there. That looks nice. And we're going to accept that. Real quickly, I notice right here, it is very, very sharp. So I'll just go in with sculpt again, and with a smooth, decrease this, and just smooth out that area until I get rid of that spike. Actually, that's not getting rid of the spike, that's kind of making it worse. So instead, I'm going to go cancel that, go into dynamic sculpt, use the move brush, and on very, very small, just try to individually bring it in like that. And then use a smooth brush to smooth it out. Okay, that's a lot better. So accept. And now we're going to have to bring down the geometry here because this is way too much right now. If I go into brush geometry, we can see that's pretty dense for a mesh. So I'm going to go into triangles, and we're going to use a remesh tool to bring that down. Actually, we're going to use simplify to bring that down. So within simplify, we have a target percentage. Let's do 10% its original geo amount. Now that drastically brought it down, and we can also see that it preserved a lot of the edges. So it kept some geometry still on the edges just to make our profile of the object look the same, but it decreased it in areas where it didn't need geometry, like right here where it's relatively flat. So I'm going to press accept. And now let's bring back our UV maps because our UV maps were pretty much destroyed when we started sculpting dynamically. And in case you don't know what a UV map is because you never used a 3D modeling program, if I get rid of this material here, we will see that we get back our default material, but you'll notice we don't get any of that grid. So we don't have any grid here. And that's essentially what a UV map does. It just maps a 3D object to a 2D texture. And we're not actually mapping anything right now. So Unreal's pretty neat in that we're able to auto UV unwrap. Keep in mind that auto UV unwrapping will never be as good as going in here and manually creating the UVs, but for our case, I think it will work out pretty well. So I'm going to go to UVs and normals and just click on auto unwrap and apply. Now we will see that we get back that grid material because our 3D model is being mapped to a 2D space where that texture is then being projected on. So I'm going to bring back my frosting. Now it's time to work on the bread of our donut, and we will use some interesting displacement trickery to get that working. So to start off making my bread, I'm going to go through it with a sculpt brush and just make it, that's how it's not a perfect torus because donuts in real life aren't perfectly smooth like that. They kind of have like a crease going through the middle. So with the normal sculpt brush, I'm going to hold down shift and sculpt in. So I'm going to decrease a bit and just sculpt in. That's how there's a little crevice going all around the donut. And that's how it's not a perfect torus. Okay, there we go. So now we can see the silhouette. It's not perfectly smooth. It kind of flattens out in the middle here. And that's what donuts actually do in real life. And I notice, like before, we have a sharp edge right there, and that is pretty annoying and pretty not realistic. So I'm going to go through with Dynasculpt again and use the Move tool and Smooth tool just to get rid of that. Now let's work on the bread material. So I'm going to right click, new material, let's do m_bread. So within here, I'm going to hold down one, left click, and let's make this a roughness of 0.6. And let's give it a color. Kind of make this brownish. Brownish tannish for now. And plug it up like that. So I'm going to apply it onto it, and don't forget to hit apply. And this is kind of boring right now. So what I will do is go through here and use vertex colors to give a white streak along the sides. So right click, type in vertex color, and let's use the red channel right now. So I'm going to hold down L and left click to bring in a lerp. And I'm going to plug up the red to alpha and duplicate this color. And actually, let's make this color just a little bit darker. And let's make this one lighter. So now I'm going to plug this one into B and this one into A and plug in the result into base color and hit apply. We will notice that there is no difference right now. So to actually paint vertex colors, we have to go into the other mode, which is mesh paint. So with the mesh paint, I'm going to go into paint and make sure only the red channel is selected, and holding down shift, we can now go through and sculpt in that secondary color. So I'm just going to sculpt around the entire thing like this. Okay, there we go. And right now the white is a little bit too strong. So I think I'll just bring that like that. Press apply. And okay, now our bread is looking kind of nice, but as we all know, bread isn't this smooth. Bread has a bunch of bumps in it, and we're now going to simulate that bump with Unreal's displacement or tessellation. So one of the goals of this project was to only use the tools and assets available within Unreal Engine, so only keeping it within the engine. And there's actually a really good bump texture that we can use if we show folder view and click on the eye icon and make sure engine content is available. If I click on engine content and type in noise, we will get tiling noise 05. So I could just drag this into my bread, and now we have a nice texture, which will be the bump. So like what we do with pretty much all textures, we'll start off by adding some tiling. So we go texture coordinate. And hold on, M, left click, multiply that with a scalar parameter, let's call it size, with a default value of 1. So just like any other material we've pretty much made. And now let's feed this through another multiply. Hold on, S, left click, and this will be our displacement strength. And we're going to default that at 1. But instead of dragging from RGB, to be on the safe side, we're going to drag from R. Because this is just one channel and RGB is 3 channels. And displacement is expecting 1 channel. So just to be on the safe side, let's just use R for now, or it could be green or blue. And plug it in like this. Now I'm going to add another node, this time a power node, which will basically function as our contrast. So hook it up like this. S, left click, scalar parameter. And we're going to call this one displacement power. And plug it up and give it a default value of course, 1 again. And before we can plug it up into our displacement, we first have to multiply this by a vertex normal. And now we'll plug it into world displacement, but we'll notice that it's grayed out right now. That's because we have to activate it within our material graph. So go all the way down here and set this to flat tessellation and make sure crack-free displacement is set to true. That's how our displacement won't have any cracks. And for tessellation multiplier, we're going to give it a value of 3, which is Unreal's max. And now we're going to apply this. Go back into my map and let's go back into content. Right click, create material instance, and drag this onto it like that. Now I will play with the values a bit. So open this up and let's dock it like here. And let's play with the power, or actually the strength first. So let's make this pretty strong. And let's also bring down the power. So just bring down the contrast a bit. Kind of like that, so we are getting some noticeable bumps. Now we don't want to go wild like this. And let's make the size pretty large. like at 4. And I'm going to bring down the power. Okay, so now it's looking good, but we notice that there is one issue, and that is it is kind of intersecting with our frosting. So we can fix this by selectively erasing areas where there will be no more displacement. And we can do that again with the vertex color. So back in my bread, I'm going to create a multiply and drag off from the green channel and multiply this like that and plug that into world displacement. So basically this will just give us the ability to manually paint out our displacement. So within here, I'm going to go into mesh paint again and make sure paint is on and only the green channel is selected. So now if I hold down shift, we can paint away some of that displacement. So I'll just go through and find areas where that displacement is intersecting with the frosting and just paint that away. And of course, don't forget to save everything. So that pretty much concludes the bread part of this tutorial. Again, pretty much I'm going really quickly right now, so maybe my donut isn't looking the best of shapes. But ideally, you would go through here and really spend time on each of these different steps and make it look great. But I'm going pretty quickly because this is a tutorial. Now let's create the sprinkles and place them on top of our frosting. And we're going to use just a little bit of math to help randomize the colors of our sprinkles and get that working. Okay, so first off, to create the sprinkle, we have to, of course, create the static mesh that will be our sprinkle. So I'm going to go back into modeling mode, and under create primitives, let's start off with a spear type wand that we're going to stretch out. That's how it's in the shape of a sprinkle later. And its geometry is way too low, so I think I'll bring the subdivision up to 1. And left click to spawn that in and create that static mesh within my generated folder. And then press complete. So now I'm going to go into deforms, then space deform, and with the tool flare, we're able to stretch out our spear and make that look like an actual sprinkle. So I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. And then I'm going to stretch out the wings right here. And grab the wing in the middle and bring that up, which will actually stretch it down like that. And try to make both of them even. So just play with these until you get a nice looking shape. I think this looks good for now, so I'm going to press accept. And I notice that the UVs are off, so I'm going to do the same thing that we did for the icing. That's to go to UV normals and auto unwrap. And accept. So now we get a nice unwrap, but we'll notice that our pivot point is all the way below our actual sprinkle geometry. And if I spread this around my icing, we'll notice that the sprinkles are actually floating, hovering above our donut. And we don't want that. So to fix our pivot point, we can go into transform, edit pivot, and now we can move where our pivot point is. So I'm just going to move it into the middle of our sprinkle and press accept. Now we're going to use the foliage tool and actually paint the sprinkle all over my frosting. And I think this is a lot more intuitive and a lot more artistic than going through Blender and using a particle tool to spawn all the flakes, because that can be, I don't know, if you ever use Blender's particle tools, you know that it's pretty hard to try to get the exact properties you want. So I'm going to modes, foliage, and drag this little, actually, let me go rename this to SM_sprinkle. And if you don't know, SM just stands for static mesh, and it's a part of Unreal's naming convention. I tend to stick with Unreal's naming convention, but you could just name this whatever you want. So I'm going to drag this in a foliage type and select it. Now, if I bring down, using the bracket keys, my brush size, and start to paint, we'll see that this is way too big right now. So first off, I'm going to bring down the scale. Let's try 0.1 with a max of 0.15. That's too small, so let's do 0.2 with a max of 0.25. Okay, that looks good, but we also need to bring up the density up here, all the way up to 1, and bring up the density more right here to, let's try 1,000. Okay, so now we're getting a lot and this is looking good. But we also, if I press Control Z, want to go down here and change the ground slope angle. Because right now, if I try to place my sprinkle at a slope, we won't get any. And as you know, sprinkles actually dig into the frosting, so we would get sprinkles at really sharp slopes. So I'm going to bring up the max from 45 to 80. And we just have one last issue, and that is if I paint down and I hold down Alt and 0 to see our UV maps, we will see that our light maps are a little bit too small. So I'm going to press Control and Z to get rid of all that. And within light map resolution, let's bring it up from 8 to 16. And now if I place it down, yeah, that's looking a little bit better. So I'm going to go back into lit and let's paint this all around. And if you don't like any specific flakes, so let's say if there's one flake you don't like its positioning at, we can use the select tool to individually move any flakes. So you can use that just to really fine tune your sprinkles. So I'm gonna go back into paint and actually I'm gonna go out because I feel like this is looking good, and don't forget to save everything. Now it's on to the fun part, and that is creating a sprinkle material that will randomly assign different colors for each of these sprinkles. So to start off, we have to, of course, create the material. So go back into content, right click, new material, and m_sprinkle. So if I go into this, let's start off with the easy stuff first. That is just assigning this a roughness of, let's say, 0.35. So that looks good. Now let's make two colors. So hold down 3, left click twice, and let's make the first one kind of like a light pinkish, and the second one a light blue. Like that. Now, in order to assign colors randomly, we need a per instance random node. And essentially what this does is that it outputs a number between 0 and 1. So each of these flakes will get their own number. So like this flake might be 0.2 and this flake might be 0.95. So we're going to use the output of this and feed it into an if node. So if you've ever done programming, it pretty much functions the same. So this is going to go into A, and for now, let's make this B value 0.5. So if this per instance random is greater than 0.5, then we will use pink. And if it is less than 0.5, then we will use blue. And if we plug this in a base color and compile, don't forget to actually apply this to our mesh. So let's go to generated, sprinkle, open that up, and drag our new sprinkle material into the slot. We should expect our sprinkles to be about 50-50 pink and blue, and it looks like that's what it is. So our per instance random node is just going around and randomly choosing between the two colors. Now, if I go back into my material, we will expand out this same concept, but 5 times. So I'm just going to duplicate this one, and let's make this a deeper purple. And duplicate the color again. Make this kind of yellowish. And duplicate it one last time and make this kind of like an off-white. So there we go. And now I'm going to duplicate this if statement. Oh, by the way, I'm duplicating by pressing Control and W at the same time 5 times. And then we're going to take the output of each one and plug that into the A is less than B. And then plug in each of these colors to A is greater than B. And plug in the per instance random to the A's. Now what I will do is click on this one and make this above 0.2 as a constant B. Make this one 0.4. This one 0.8. And actually this one is 0.6. And this one 0.8. And take the output of all these and put it into base color. Now, essentially what all this is doing is just it's randomly selecting a color out of these 5 colors right here. So if I press apply and go back into my world, we can see that we have all 5 of those colors being randomly spread around my donut sprinkles. So in case you're still confused of what just happened, if I go back into my material, essentially, if this per instance random, which is giving a value in between 0 and 1, is in between 0 and 0.2, then this color is chosen. If it's in between 0.2 and 0.4, this one is chosen. If it's in between 0.4, 0.6, this one, 0.6 and 0.8, this yellow, and finally, if it's in between 0.8 and 1, it will choose this white. So it's a nice even spread because each of these colors have a 20% chance of being picked. So that's pretty much how you would go about it and create a donut exclusively in Unreal Engine. So not using any outside help, any other programs, and it's amazing that we're able to do that within Unreal. So for the last part of the tutorial, let's make this render look just a little bit better. So I'm going to delete that flake right there. And I'm going to hold down Alt and 0 to see our light maps. So if you don't know what a light map is, it's essentially showing not really the pixels, but you could think of it as the pixels of the shadow map that will be generated. So the higher this is, then the more shadow details we will get. So for here, we can see that this is set to movable, which means there are no light bakes. We want some light bakes. So I'm going to set that to stationary, actually static. And go all the way down and increase our pixel density by, let's do 256. And the one right here, let's set this to static and increase this by 256, actually 512. Let's make the top one 512 too. And let's make the floor 512. Okay, so this is looking nice. We have some pretty dense texture density or shadow map density. And now let me change the ground floor right here. So right click, material, let's go m_floor. And let's give this just a dark purplish color. And a roughness of 1, because I don't want a shiny floor right now. And then before we bake, I want to make sure that both of these are set to static. So my skylight is set to static and my sun is set to movable. Let's change that to static. And let's go into world setting and just increase my light mask bake settings. So the lower static lighting level scale, the more detail we get. So let's make this 0.5. And then let's bring up our light bounces to 10. And for indirect lighting quality, I need to set this to 2. Since we want our indirect lighting quality multiplied by our static lighting level scale to be equal to 1, and 0.5 times 2 is 1. If I were to make this even more detailed, like 0.1, then I would set this to 10. But I feel like 2 and 0.5 is good for now. Now, before I build, I'm going to come up to build and right click, go to build quality and set that to medium. And actually, I don't like the color right here on the floor. It's a bit too saturated. So I'm just going to bring down that saturation just a bit. And apply. Now this is looking nice. So let's build. Okay, so the build just finished. And we can see we're getting some nice realistic shadows. But one thing I do notice is on my frosting, the roughness on my frosting and the sprinkles is way too high. So I'm going to go into frosting and let's make this 0.2. Okay, there we go. That's better. And my sprinkles, let's make this 0.25. Now I'm going to press G to go into game view so I can get rid of all my editor widgets. And let's add in a post-process volume. In details, make sure infinite extend bound is checked on. And then we can go into global illumination and boost up that bounce brightness. So I can go in here and play around and just to see what it looks like. So like that. And now if I press on my donut base, press F, let's do G a couple times, and holding down Alt with the left mouse button, I can rotate around our donut and just appreciate what we were able to create within Unreal Engine without any other programs like Blender or Substance. So this was all within Unreal, and what is crazier is that we can expect these tools to get even better going into the future as we quickly approach the release of Unreal Engine 5. So that's very exciting, and I would say that this is pretty much the conclusion of this tutorial. If you got something out of it, make sure you like, subscribe, and check out my other videos. And with all that being said, I'd say this is the end. Goodbye.